Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming on such a chill night. The topic is indeed mind over matter, about suggestibility and willpower. And when I constructed this first slide, I had no idea how apposite it would be for this evening, because you've probably experienced something a little bit like that on your way here. Now, if you were to take the words mind over matter literally, you might think that it referred to psychokinesis, the ability of the mind to move objects. Of course, there were plenty of magicians managing to achieve that kind of effect, dating from Victorian times and earlier. But there is no evidence that you can actually move objects or influence dice or bend spoons by the power of your mind alone. There have from time to time been claims that this was observed within a scientific context, but never sufficient to ride beyond the idea that it could be explained just by selective publication. Tendency for positive results to get published and negative results to be thrown in the rubbish bin. And as a matter of fact, the magician James Randi has put out a challenge to anybody that thinks that they have psychokinesis and could demonstrate it within a scientific context. He would give them $1 million. Nobody has taken him up yet, not even Uri Geller. In fact, I'm reminded of an old musical joke in which anyone who believes in psychokinesis, raise my hand. Now, a number of phenomena might at first appear to be mind over matter. Take, for example, firewalking, which was an act that Japanese and other priests and magicians have demonstrated from time to time, and it's often a purification or an endurance ritual. And Western observers used to think this is rather astonishing, and it must be something to do with the incantations that they do before they go out there and mobilizing the power of the will to achieve this remarkable ability. But in fact, it's since been discovered that anybody can do this, given the right conditions, without any superpowers. And in fact, it's now often done as an exercise at motivational weekends away from the office. It is, however, rather dangerous. A lot of people have burned their feet in the process. Apparently it's critical how the embers have nearly burned out, late stages of burning. If there is metal debris lurking around in the ashes, you could be in serious trouble. And the other thing apparently is the pace at which you walk. If you run, you're likely to burn your feet because your feet go deep into the embers, and the protective layer of sweat and steam and so on ceases to operate. So there is a technique to it, but it is not a magical or mystical ability. Now, there are lots of sort of snake oil type cures floating around, quack cures, alternative treatments, which very often have absolutely no credible basis to them whatsoever. If you take homeopathy, which appears to have royal approval, there is a royal homeopathic hospital that has been patronized by royalty in London over a long period of time. And yet, if you look at the theory, there is no plausible way in which it could work. Homeopathy works on the principle of like curing like. In other words, a little bit of what has caused you to be ill can make you well again, provided it is sufficiently diluted. It's sort of almost got a glimmering of the inoculation theory to it. But they double dilute these chemicals until there is absolutely nothing left except water. There are no molecules, active molecules left in homeopathic substances if they have been properly prepared. The homeopathic experts the apologists for homeopathy will tell you that the water retains a memory of having had the substance in it, but it's still just water. Now, the astonishing thing is that homeopathic remedies seem to work. That is, a high proportion of people say that they feel better as a result of having had them. And therefore, we have to ask why. Well, one thing, of course, is that they might be withdrawing from a very unpleasant medical treatment that they've been prescribed. And if they stop that, they will feel better because it feels better when it stops. But there are other things involved here. The big one, of course, is the placebo effect, which literally means pleasing people, and it refers to the belief that you are being treated having an effect upon your expectations of improvement, which become self-fulfilling prophecies. If you believe that you are being treated and that it is going to be effective, then you will tend to get better, regardless of any medical mechanisms which might be working as well. It's added value, the placebo effect. It's a bit like mummy kissing it better. Now, we know that there is no active process going on there, but it just feels nice that mummy is being supportive, and you do feel better. Now, surveys, you can actually get homeopathic remedies. They sell them, placebos, which I'm suggesting homeopathic remedies are placebos, but they may actually be labelled placebo, and some doctors prescribe them as such. But many more doctors will say, well, yes, I do use placebos in my practice, but I disguise it a little bit. I will prescribe vitamins or mild over-the-counter analgesics, which might conceivably have some benefit in their own right. But that is their way of getting around the ethical dilemma of effectively prescribing a placebo. Unfortunately, some doctors use antibiotics as placebos as well, and that, I'm sure we would agree, is not a good practice. They will give antibiotics to somebody with a virus where it's going to give no benefit whatsoever other than placebo. Now, what are the components of the placebo effect? Well, the one that we were talking about is the true placebo effect. But there are a whole lot of other components that drug trials try to minimize. Things like the bedside manner of the doctor-patient relationship. Spontaneous recovery. People tend to get better of their own accord if they don't actually drop dead. They will recover spontaneously. Something called regression to the mean. People tend to seek treatment when they are at a peak of distress. Hence, the probability on the law of averages is that they are going to get better later on when you come to evaluate them. Hello, goodbye effects is effectively just pleasing the therapist. He expects you to say that I'm feeling better as a result of that treatment, and so you do. You just sort of oblige the doctor or the therapist by saying, oh, thanks, doc, I feel a lot better. It's what you are expected to do, so you do it. Now, drug trials normally try to eliminate or minimize all but the true placebo effect, but they probably don't succeed in doing so. Some of the things that make for a good placebo, any of the trappings of medical authority, the white coat and the stethoscope, the diploma on the wall, and so on, will enhance placebo effect. The expense of the medication. Branded medicines have a more powerful placebo effect than their generic equivalent. Large pills are better than small pills, and it is better to say take 2 of these rather than 1. The colour is very important. Hot colours are best as stimulants. Green is particularly favoured for treatments for anxiety, and blue for insomnia. I'm wearing a hot colour at the moment to try and persuade myself that it's a warm night. Don't know how successfully. Capsules are more effective than tablets. You know, the little transparent ones that are two bicoloured rather than one colour. And injections beat both capsules and tablets. Now, this is fascinating. Despite great ethical objections, people have actually used surgery as a placebo. That is, they have appeared to conduct a surgical procedure, like using anesthesia, making incisions in a patient, declaring the operation a success, and so on. And incredibly, these often come out as just as effective as real surgery. And the studies include operations for angina, arthritis of the knee, spinal infusion for osteoporosis, and neuronal implantation for Parkinson's disease. There are actual published studies in which fake operations have been conducted to see if they're as good as real operations, and unfortunately they often turn out to be just as effective. And one is then reminded of the so-called psychic surgeons of Indonesia who do sham operations. They pass their hands over people and they appear to pull out bits of intestine and so on, which on later analysis will turn out to be pigs' innards, but nevertheless the patients feel a great deal better as a result of the ministrations of the psychic surgeons. Now, not everybody actually responds to placebos. When they do, the effects seem to mimic those of the equivalent active medication. For example, a placebo given as a painkiller will mimic the treatment for, mimic opioid, morphine-type treatments in terms of its brain effects. And people who are placebo responders tend to show activity in that part of the brain. Non-responders, less so. And only perhaps a third to half of people are placebo responders for the most part. There are certain personality traits that predict the placebo response. Optimism is one of them. Ego, resiliency, altruism, straightforwardness, and low levels of anger and hostility seem to predict placebo analgesic effect in this particular study. Incidentally, the references for any studies that are mentioned here can be found in the handout that you might obtain on your way out. Those traits taken together predicted or accounted for about 25% of the variance in the placebo response. And this group were also able to show that the higher the placebo response of the individual, the more endorphin was released in their brain and the more cortisol secretion was lowered. So what that shows, looking at those personality traits that go with placebo response, it would be a mistake to dismiss them as sort of stupid, gullible people, weak in personality. If anything, the reverse. It seems that positive traits like optimism and strong ego and altruism go with placebo response, rather the same as good hypnotic subjects are not weak people. They are using their own resources in a positive kind of a way. I suppose the other point to note there is that because you can observe placebo effects in the brain, there is a sense in which they are real. They're not totally imaginary. because you can observe them taking place in brain imaging studies. Now, acupuncture is an interesting one because there are quite a few studies which appear to show that sticking needles in people and manipulating the needles will reduce pain and stress in a number of sufferers. Now, one of the problems is that it's very difficult to find adequate control procedures because there's no way you can stick needles in somebody without them noticing that it's been done. So most of the placebo controls are not going to be very effective. One way is to put the needles in the wrong places. That is, if you take this model of where the meridians are within acupuncture theory and you put the needles in the wrong places outside of the meridians, you find that it is about the same in terms of effectiveness. And the evidence that either sham or true acupuncture is better than placebo is unconvincing, and again could be accounted for in terms of selective publication of positive results. Now, if indeed acupuncture does work, if that could be established, then almost certainly release of endorphins by puncturing people's skin would be a better explanation than the traditional Chinese theory of meridians and balancing the yin and yang energies. Now, just as you can have positive placebo effects, you can have a reverse or negative effect. Voodoo curses, pointing the bone at people, depending on which culture you're in. Even the experience of being bitten by a non-venomous snake have been known to result in death. And it may occur immediately as a result of shock. More often, it's a slow process in which the individual themselves appears to act out a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they will themselves to death, perhaps by starvation. But you can get noxious effects, which are the flip side of the placebo. Now, there was a study that was published under the title of The Hound of the Baskervilles Effect, I think by Phillips, in which they looked at Chinese and Japanese patients in America, and apparently they regard the number 4 as unlucky. And they did indeed find that cardiac mortality peaked on the 4th day of each month in Oriental patients, whereas no such effect could be observed within white Americans. That would be parallel. It raises the issue that doctors have to be very careful, I think, about telling a patient that their condition is terminal, because some patients will effectively give up and say, well, you know, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die, and they pop their clogs all the sooner. So it is probably a good idea not to point the bone at patients, even within Western medicine, but give them some hope and say that, you know, this is a dangerous condition, but who knows, you might get through it. It's a difficult dilemma because, you know, the counter-argument is that people have a right to know that they've got to get their affairs in order before they do die. So a difficult line to tread there. A number of studies show that feelings of well-being, optimism, will reduce death rates in both healthy and diseased groups of people. Read an interesting one in the paper this morning that apparently people who play golf live about 5 years longer than non-golfers. Now, that may be something to do with enjoying the game and getting exercise and fresh air and everything. Alternatively, it might just be that you've got to be a fit and healthy person to play golf in the first place. The cause and effect is a bit difficult, but it was an interesting observation. A Scandinavian group reported that. There is evidence that people are more likely to die just after a major birthday or holiday than before it. In other words, you might get through Christmas Day and then die. I have a round number birthday coming up very soon, so I'm good for a few more days. Interesting study by Christenfeld et al., who looked at people whose initials read something positive, like ACE or VIP, and compared them with people whose initials were negative, PIG or DIE. And they found that those with the positive initials lived on average about 4 years longer, which is a rather remarkable result. And they interpret it as being due to self-esteem, that, maybe you've been bullied or ribbed for having a silly set of initials or something for so many years that it lowers your self-esteem, and this works through into your health and mortality. Negative events like divorce, loss of a job, death of a close relative have cardiac consequences, as do catastrophes like earthquakes and military conflicts. Perhaps the most disastrous thing that could possibly happen to anybody is to lose a penalty shootout in the World Cup. And when this happened to England in 1998, here's an illustration of, I think this chappie missed his goal, which passed the game over to Argentina. Admissions to hospital in England increased by 25% within a couple of days after that event. That is admissions for coronaries events particularly. Now, there's been a lot of interest in the possibility that personality types are prone to particular disorders. Quite a common one is the idea that suppressing emotion will cause cancer. It's a very favoured theory. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a lot of support for it. The research was not convincing, it was contradictory. And the same with extroversion and neuroticism. They don't seem to predict the likelihood of you catching or surviving cancer. That was called the type C, cancer-prone personality, incidentally. Now, there's been a lot of talk about a so-called type A personality, identified by some American researchers several decades ago, and it consisted of achievement orientation, ambitiousness if you like, time urgency, tendency to jog with a stopwatch, for example, and the third component was anger or hostility. Now there is evidence for the last of those, that is hostility. One of the three components does predict coronary proneness, but the effect size tends to be rather small. And once again, the cause and effect is a bit unclear. It could be that when people start behaving in a hostile kind of a way, that what you are observing or detecting is the first sign of a disease process that is eventually going to kill them. But nevertheless, earthquakes are hard to predict, and so are heart attacks. There is rather better evidence for something called the type D personality as a predictor of cardiovascular disease. Type D stands for distressed, I suppose is the best way to remember it. And it consists of a collation of all the negative emotions you can think of, obviously anxiety, depression, and anger, three of them. And if you've got a whole set of those, then it apparently raises the likelihood of a cardiovascular accident. There's very, very good evidence that stress can affect your immune system. It can compromise your immunity and make you vulnerable to a great range of different diseases and disorders. Recent study I came across these people, I'm not quite sure how you'd pronounce that name, Fagundes maybe. They found that children who have been neglected in childhood, perhaps their parents fought a lot and they had a rather traumatic upbringing, combined with a current life stress, leads to an increased vulnerability to basal cell carcinoma, a very common non-malignant kind of skin cancer. And you might not think that's not very important, but the probability is that the same would apply to rather more lethal cancers like malignant melanoma and ovarian cancer, which are known to be immune responsive cancers. And the theory is that we are all dealing with the beginnings of cancer all the time, and for the most part our immune system is able to keep it at bay. But stress could knock your immunity and make you vulnerable to cancer. I think the evidence for that is now fairly good. It can also make you vulnerable to the common cold. These people, Cohen et al., exposed, actually Cohen's been doing this for a long time, exposing people to the cold virus. And it doesn't make any difference whether you are cold or you're cold and wet and damp and so on. That doesn't increase the likelihood that you will catch a cold. Obviously, availability of the virus is necessary, and you get more availability in winter when the windows are all closed and people are coughing and sneezing. But you are also apparently more likely to get a cold if you are stressed, as measured in a number of different ways, questionnaire and stressful events that have just occurred to people within their life will increase the likelihood that they will catch a cold. You still have to have the cold virus available, of course, but immune suppression will make you more vulnerable. That's the other thing. Cohen's group managed to go on and show that the effect was operating through the immune system and the way in which it was compromised. Now, there's been a lot of interest in a treatment called guided imagery, in which it's a kind of meditation in which usually cancer patients are trained to imagine scenarios that are safe and comforting and happy. That's one common approach. Another approach is to tell people to picture your immune system gobbling up the cancer cells, like little Pac-Man, if you remember that game on a computer, and to imagine that the tumour is shrinking. Now, the evidence seems to show that this kind of treatment is supportive in that it will reduce stress and anxiety, possibly even pain, but it doesn't have a very obvious impact on the physical symptoms of cancer, and there's certainly no evidence, convincing evidence, that it will cure cancer. There is a very fashionable therapeutic approach called mindfulness going around at the moment, which is derived from Buddhist philosophy and meditation. And as far as I understand it or can encapsulate it, its key idea is that people are happier if their thoughts are focused on the present rather than the past or the future. I summarize it by saying that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. But clearly this will depend upon the circumstances. If you are in prison, facing a firing squad or sitting in a dentist's chair, for example, it would surely be preferable to fantasize, to use that guided imagery technique and think yourself somewhere else. And indeed, there is very good evidence that distraction can be used as a treatment for, say, pain, as analgesic effects, if you get people doing something other than sitting and thinking about the pain. In the case of dentistry, they might use music or videos that will enable you to put your thoughts somewhere else rather than focusing on the pain that the dentist might be causing. There is the idea that adrenaline can give you protection against the recognition that you've been seriously injured in battle is well illustrated by the Marquis of Anglesey. Apparently in the Battle of Waterloo was riding beside the Duke of Wellington when he announced, "By God, sir, I've lost my leg." And Wellington supposedly replied, "By God, sir, so you have." And they carried on. It's, one of these little anecdotes that apocryphal perhaps. But it is certainly true that with a bit of adrenaline you can carry on doing things and worrying about pain on some later occasion when you've got nothing better to think about. Now, one of the key principles of learning is that you need some sort of knowledge of results. If you're trying to learn how to throw darts into a bullseye, for example, you can throw as many darts as you like. You will never improve if you don't know where those darts are landing. So you need some kind of feedback. You need to be able to see where your dart landed. And the principle of biofeedback is that if a person can observe their own internal autonomic physiological processes, they are better placed to control them. I have a little blood pressure measuring machine, and I find that if I take it over and over again, it goes down. Every time I take the reading, it's lower than the time before. And I'm not quite sure exactly what is going on there. I'm just sort of persuading myself that I must relax for the next one. And that's the principle on which these machines work. Devices like brain waves, heart rate, skin conductance, and skin temperature is quite a popular one, can be used to give people information about their stress and anxiety, perhaps, that enables them to learn how to control it. And there is very good evidence that biofeedback, as it's called, is a useful adjunct to treatment of a wide range of conditions, such as stress, hypertension, headaches, and incontinence. Sometimes you just see a moving graph of your blood pressure or something, and other times your job is to concentrate on being relaxed, and you will get nice pictures of a relaxing country scene or something if you're getting your brainwaves right. Now, the idea of conversion disorder, it is a psychodynamic theory that people are capable of translating their anxiety and their stress into physical symptoms. And indeed, it is very clear that it is possible to get very serious conditions like blindness, paralysis, and amnesia for purely psychogenic, or what sometimes called hysterical reasons. Historically, the famous case studies of Breuer and Freud investigated so-called conversion disorders, and they still occur today, and it is often very difficult to distinguish them from conscious malingering on the one hand, get yourself out of unpleasant situations, whiplash if you've had a car crash or something, and genuine somatic causes where you've got a severing of a nerve or something that induces a proper paralysis that is not going to be reversed. There are certain signs that would enable you to pick the difference. One is that hysterical conditions, conversion disorders, are usually preceded by some extreme stress or other. A second observation is that people who have these hysterical conditions don't seem to be too perturbed about it. They're not really distressed about their symptoms. They don't really want to be rid of them. And the reason might be that they often have some secondary gain. They get them home from the battlefield, or in the case of one of Freud's patients, no longer being required to look after an ailing elderly parent. And there are other neurological cues like retaining normal reflexes, which the experts are now finding they can distinguish these different types of paralysis, amnesia, and so on. But nevertheless, hysterical conversion disorders do occur. Now, a theory of hysteria was that it was due to a wandering womb. It was noted by the Victorian psychiatrists that hysterical symptoms were more common in women, and quite a lot of psychiatrists considered that sexual frustration must be the primary cause. And in those days, of course, masturbation was considered dangerous to health, so they came up with a form of therapy that they called mid-body massage, which was much enjoyed by the patients, probably also the doctor, but it would get him struck off today. At a time when female orgasm was little recognized, some of the hysterical paroxysms that were induced by this mid-body massage might have actually given some relief. There's somebody advertising it. I wonder how far you'd get with that in the politically correct days. The origins of hypnosis were in the so-called animal magnetism that this chap Anton Mesmer came up with in the late 18th century. Mentioned in Così fan tutte, incidentally. Somebody comes in with magnets that are supposed to cure somebody of hysterical disorders. Now, Mesmer himself was able to cure hysterical symptoms with his animal magnetism, and he initially thought that it was some sort of electrical effect, perhaps parallel to electrical brain stimulation, which is used today. But he later on realized or recognized that, in fact, it had nothing to do with electricity at all. It was all down to the magnetism of his own personality, his persuasiveness as a therapist. And Sigmund Freud, of course, was very interested in this, and apparently he wasn't a particularly good hypnotist himself, and he discovered that a lot of patients couldn't be put into hypnotic trances, and so he favored the technique of psychoanalysis, which was lying them on a couch and reducing the ambient stimulation and just getting them to chat freely. And Freud was amazed at how often female patients in particular would recall sexual episodes with their own father. And his first thought was that they had been subjected to sexual abuse from the father. He later on decided that no, it was the patient's fantasy, and in fact their own desire, sexual desire for their father, which was generating these recollections of sex with the father. And we've gone full circle now, where you have a lot of therapists who are managing to extract recovered memories of sexual abuse from the father, some of which could be real, but others, no doubt, false recollections. Hypnosis today is very popular, not just as a sort of stage magician's act, but also in therapy. It uses suggestions of sleep or relaxation, focusing your attention. There might be a pendulum or something that is beginning the focus of attention, and compliance. You will do my will, whatever I do, whatever I tell you, you will do. And once in this hypnotic trance, people seem to be very suggestible and can do extraordinary things. They seldom behave in ways that would be 100% out of character. And again, as I mentioned before, we mustn't suppose that people who are good hypnotic subjects are just weak-willed. In fact, it probably takes a positive will to enter into the game with the hypnotist, because that's effectively what they have to do. But it is certainly an effective therapeutic tool for a number of common problems like pain and anxiety, phobias, and habit control. A lot of people have managed to give up smoking through hypnosis where no other treatment has been effective. The effects certainly experimentally go beyond straightforward role play. It's more like total absorption in a movie, is perhaps the best way of thinking of hypnosis. And it's often said that people can perform extraordinary feats of strength or memory under hypnosis. The evidence for that is not convincing, to be honest. As a matter of fact, as I say, you're more likely to get false recollections in a hypnotic trance than real ones. It doesn't improve your memory. It makes it very dubious. People remember past lives and alien abductions, and a lot of child sexual abuse has been generated by therapists. They know what they're looking for in their patient. They can usually manage to find it or elicit it. Faith healing is, of course, a kind of hypnosis with a spiritual rationale to it, and been around for a long time. Jesus Christ was good at it, apparently, and it's still popular in Catholicism, where you have pilgrimages to Lourdes, and charismatic churches, Pentecostal churches, for example, do a lot of faith healing. Outright miracles are probably a bit thin on the ground. Even the Vatican is skeptical of most of them. They have so far validated 67 out of approximately 7,000 claimants. But it's very likely that many more people will have benefited from faith healing through stress reduction and or placebo effect. Stigmata, an interesting phenomenon here, crucifixion-style wounds which have appeared in devout Catholics over the centuries since Francis of Assisi, back in 1224, came up with stigmata. Most of them are rather poorly documented. We know that some are fraud. More of them probably are self-inflicted during trances, perhaps induced by starvation. A few may be what they call psychogenic purpura, which are purple blotches that can be self-induced by very powerful autosuggestion. And these would be more equivalent to the sort of the markings that some people who have been abducted by aliens come up with, little patterns of dots around their genitals or something that where they believe they have been examined medically by the aliens. And these have been observed to appear under hypnosis. It's interesting that most of them, the stigmata appear on the palm of the hand, whereas it's now believed that the actual Roman crucifixion procedures were to drive the nails through the wrists. because the body wouldn't hang properly if you put the nails through the palm. And the fact that most of the stigmata appear on the palm has probably come out of experience of medieval paintings depicting Christ as crucified through the palm. Padre Pio is a well-known stigmatic who was canonized in 2002. He was accused of using carbolic acid to create and maintain his wounds by Lazzato. I can't say whether that proof is persuasive, or whether there is still some doubt in the matter. But I don't know. That is a photograph. It was quite difficult to get a picture of Padre Pio's stigmata because he used to cover up his hands a great deal, apparently. Now, the nice thing about hysteria is that it is contagious. Rather like a virus, it gets about. Mysterious illnesses have struck around the world from time to time, and usually one goes through the process of excluding toxins which might account for them, and ultimately you fall back on the theory that it must be hysterical anxiety. And the symptoms are commonly fainting or swooning, sometimes tics or paralysis. There's an outbreak in a Kenyan school. You suspect it is hysterical contagion if the victims are teenage girls and the boys are not affected. Hard to think of environmental toxins that would affect girls and not boys. They tend to be socially cohesive girls. They're all in the same class or the same convent or whatever. If you look at the personality types who are affected against those who are unaffected, the sort of histrionic, theatrical, attention-seeking individuals tend to be more susceptible. These would be the neurotic extroverts down on the deck. The rest of them would be stable introverts. And very often you implicate some kind of social stress in an outbreak of hysterical contagion. You might recall the medieval dancing, the St. Vitus dance that caught people. The tarantella comes from the idea that you had been bitten by a tarantula, apparently, but again, it was almost certainly hysterical contagion. And nun possession was very common in medieval times. Nuns would suddenly have an outbreak of obscenity, extreme bawdiness and lewdness, and again, it tended to occur in societies that were under stress. I don't know if anybody saw a documentary, Channel 4 documentary called The Town That Caught Tourette's. It was an outbreak of Tourette's that occurred in a girls' school in a little upstate New York town called Leroy. And several teenage girls came down with it, violent tics and convulsions. They couldn't find any organic basis for it. But they did notice that the girls who were affected tended to have difficult life circumstances of one. They felt neglected and ignored perhaps by their family. And if they were seeking attention, incidentally, they got it because they managed to make a lot of appearances on TV chat shows throughout the afternoon. Eventually, a doctor managed to effectively treat quite a few of the girls with antibiotics. He came up with this theory that, in fact, there was a bacterium that was causing these tics and convulsions. And indeed, quite a number of them treated in that way did get better, but the probability is that it was a placebo effect. Now, it's not only women that are affected by hysterical contagion. You get, particularly in Southeast Asian countries, occasional outbreaks of koro, which is the belief that your genitals are shrinking and contracting inside you. again occurring mostly in times of social stress. And the men are known to apply pegs or clamps to prevent complete retraction, which is believed to be fatal. In West Africa, you get something similar, outbreaks of penis shrinking and penis theft, which are attributed to evil magic. And if you are accused of trying to steal somebody's penis, you're likely to be beaten to death. Apparently at least 14 penis thieves were put to death in Nigeria in 2001. So here's a summary of it, that mind and body are very closely intertwined. There are very few disorders that are purely physical or purely mental. If you take peptic ulcers, for example, they at one stage were attributed to stress alone. Then somebody discovered a bacterium that seemed to be associated with 80% of the cases, and it was successfully treated with antibiotics. Then they discovered that quite a high proportion of the general population without peptic ulcers also carry this bacterium, but are not actually symptomatic. So it's obviously not just an infectious disease either. Warts, of course, are due to viruses, but they often disappear mysteriously, which keeps the wart charmers in business. So once again, it seems that you've got a mixture of a physical condition and psychological stress, and it is the immune capability or compromise which is determining whether or not you get warts. And a final point, psychosomatic effects are real. They're not imaginary. They can be observed in the brain, and we certainly need to study them in order to maximize the positive benefit of placebo effects and the power of the mind in order to optimize our treatments. It's not just a case of mind over matter, but mind certainly does matter. Thank you very much.